So Michelle, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me, Maori. We're so honored to be showing Fierceness Served in BlackStar this year.
We're honored that you submitted.
Congratulations on an incredible festival this year.
Thank you.
In person and virtual.
Yes, thank you so much. So this is a casual opportunity just to kind of talk to you about things that you may not get a chance to talk about at the Q&A. So I want to start off with something really light, and what is bringing you joy lately?
Sun, lots of heat. Okay, haven't felt outside in a long time.
Yeah.
So this is bringing me lots of joy. This is bringing me lots of joy, this being the BlackStar Film Festival, and your growth and expansion. This is big black joy, okay? Big black joy.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the film and ask you, so your film is about a coffee house that galvanized artists into multi-generational, international, queer cultural movement. What can we learn from the birth and evolution of this movement?
Well, I think a couple of things. And again, you can never count on what other people might think when they see your work. But the galvanizing, healing, spiritual power of the arts is incredible. And when I think about the times in which we were all coming up as musicians, writers, filmmakers, dancers at that time, it was the 1980s. We roughly had the coffee house from 1983 to 89. And we were a cohort of black LGBTQ artists in Washington, D.C. during the height of the crack epidemic, during AIDS and its virulence flying everywhere. And it was that hub, that community, that sharing, caring, and people we lost during that process that kept us going forward.
Yeah.
It was a shared idea of being visible. That was our main thrust in the 80s, that we could speak about our love and our lives and our presence and be present in our own names.
Yeah.
And I still see it reflected in lots of the films that are presented in BlackStar this year as well. The power of identity is a life force, and you must have it. And you must have its honesty and its power.
Yeah.
So the coffee house was a place for us to gather in an alley. It used to be a carriage house that was transformed by the townhouse owners. And they allowed us to come in and work and, do photo shoots and perform and rehearse. And we were a cohort of folks of all expressions of, sexual presence. Among the people there were Essex Hemphill, the writer, who lots of you know. Groups like the Four of Us, who did kind of mainstream Burt Bacharach kind of music and vocalese a la, so many jazz artists here, So it was an incredible expression and variety of expression. Most of us were in our 30s and 40s, some were younger. And as I see those of us who have moved on as a cohort and gone to other spaces, places, a new time, another name, now we're queer, which is fine with me. We were queer then, so were some of you. So it's all about marking your place.
Yeah.
Having a space like that was an incredible blessing.
Yeah. So much of your work has been about, I imagine, people who are either heroes to you or people who were friends of yours. And I'm curious how you make decisions about the, films that you're going to make. Like, do they come to you one day, or do you have like a backlog and you're working through them? How do you make decisions?
There is a backlog. But the backlog skews over genre as well. There's narrative ideas I've gotten, more shorts, features, as well as documentary ideas that we're trying to, cook up it right now. A lot of it is based on financing. A lot of it is based on many of the people I made early documentaries about were people I grew up, my parents introduced me to, or I grew up knowing about. Like Betty Carter was the first person I made a documentary about. It was my first big film. I remember coming here to Philadelphia. I think there was a place called the Blue Note here at that time. And she was performing, so I came up from DC and, pitched it to her backstage. And I was like 27, 26. Betty Carter? What is Betty Carter? Who is Betty Carter? Bebop, what is that? How are you knowing about these things? How are you still morphing the music and expanding? And the reach of your music is expanding as well. So, Sweet Honey in the Rock, I happened to be working on their production team at the time, on their album, Believe I'll Run On and See What the End's Gonna Be. And out of that experience, it was clear to me, someone was tapping me, Spirit was tapping me on the shoulder and said, this needs to be made into a film, Michelle. DC knows about it, much of the world knows about it, but maybe you can get this into a larger expression because Sweet Honey in the Rock were a cappella change makers, living it, creating the music, and of course, driven and headed by Bernice Johnson Reagan, who was and is a power unto herself. She alone is a documentary.
Yeah.
Just thinking.
I've tried.
Okay. You've been
Dr. Regan was my advisor in undergrad, and Michelle was my advisor in grad school, so I'm incredibly blessed between the two of you. But
we were blessed. We are blessed by all the ways you're manifesting. Believe me, it was my pleasure. Some people when they walk in the door, first time office hours, this person is a change maker, okay? Same for you. This is what I saw when you came through my door.
Thank you.
So, it comes in different ways. Some things you just think about and know, they eliminate themselves. They're great ideas. A movie plan in your head is fantastic. But when you think about doing it, maybe it's not yours to make. Maybe it's not yours to make right now. Maybe it's another bunch of money that you're learning how to get to make the movie.
Yeah, I understand that. Is there anything that was left out of Fierceness Served that because as a short, I'm sure it's not the whole story, but is there anything that you're just really wishing you could have fit in or that you didn't have time to cover or?
There were so many other artists. We really wanted to blow out Essex's story because another film unto itself, could be made. But we had a humanities grant. That was the first money from the DC Humanities Council. And we had to produce a product by the end of that year. And we did a little crowdfunding and things like that. Folks made donations. But, we originally saw it as an hour-long film, but we had to boil it down, and the requirement of the humanities grant was that it was no longer than 40 minutes. So we were left to shape, create, eliminate, morph, pivot, as my producer says. My producer's right here, Shirley Hainsworth, who got us through this experience and showed me an entree into new technologies that were vitally important. That's one thing about filmmakers who've been on the scene a while. I think it was Zainabu this morning who called us seasoned a filmmaker. I don't know how seasoned. I'm still boiling. I'm still marinating. But yeah, you've got to work with the technology changing as well, Maori, as you know.
Yeah.
So you need folks to get you. You need a project that moves you, and learn how to pivot and get some version of what you want done. So hopefully there'll be other longer versions of individual groups and stories and those that were not included in the film down the line. So those the 10 films right now out of that one short that's going to screen tonight at 8.
Can you talk about the genesis of making this film? Sort of how did you begin, and how long did it take?
It took us, we got the grant in the end of 2020, and we made it in 2021. We had roughly 8 months to produce this little gem. And it was being made during COVID, during the height of COVID, which was another dance when you add that into the equation of production work. And I had so much to say about things. Keep me on track, Maori, because my head is flying through those 8 months like, we did, we didn't, oh, we did, you know. But what originated the idea, Maori, was Wason Jones, who was Essex Hemphill's partner, musical partner. If any of you had the chance to see Essex and Wason perform Essex's poetry and Wason's music as a bed and a wraparound, and really a context for Essex's work together. The collaboration was incredible. Of course, Essex died in 1995, but Wason has gone on to become a visual artist. And he was at a panel at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and they were doing a panel on the 1980s DC art scene. And there was no mention of any of the artists in our cohort who had gone on to bigger things, new disciplines, combinations of disciplines. And so Wason left that panel and said, you know what? We have to tell our own stories. And so he started calling all of us who were part of the coffeehouse community and seeing how we could bring this together. And that's how it got started. We shaped the film in a steering committee of 5 members, all of us who were different disciplines in the Coffeehouse Times, and decisions were made communally, and that was a great experience for me as a director as well. That's also been a part of my process, is to work collaboratively with either the subjects or work with groups of people to make a movie.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't have any, you know, fear of not being an auteur. I don't, you know, I like it. I like it, expands vision. And it was a check. It was a reality check. It was an archival check. It was a rights and clearances check. All of where were the archives? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about this collective process? I feel like people are really interested in figuring that out for themselves, but often don't know where to begin. So, are there any processes that you can share for someone looking to do a project in community like that?
Well, one thing is to figure out who would be that committee, who would steer that process for you, who will help you make it, and not just everybody has their own movie version of the ultimate movie that needs to be made. Another thing is how you work with the subjects of your documentary. Do you work with them? Or are you making a movie about them? That's a whole different kind of film. And I love making movies with the subjects of my work. I've been blessed to work with the subjects of my work.
Yeah.
When I think about it, it's incredible. How did that happen?
Yeah. So another question in terms of the structure of the film was how do you, because with some nonfiction films there is a script, and other times the script comes after the fact, or some hybrid. And so for this particular film, what was the writing like?
Well, there was a treatment that really was the guiding light of it, because it was always in flux. Some people died before we could get to them. It's a process by which I love, that's one of the things I love about working with documentary. It's a guiding thought and a guiding story plan. It's like the Bible that people have when you do sitcoms. There's a certain story and origin for it and blah, blah, blah. This is what we do, and this is what this character does or does not do. But this was a way for us to move the history along, but not be dismayed if we had discoveries along the way, and we didn't have a lot of time to figure out whether we would incorporate or not incorporate those discoveries. And that's where that steering committee was awfully helpful. It was also, at the time, because of COVID, 6-hour Zoom conferences that we had on Sundays because we had to go over every little thing and everybody's opinion had to be heard.
Yeah. And you were earlier mentioning, just sort of like a new generation versus yours. And I'm curious, what is a hope for you that this film does for, Gen Z or, even for Gen X, just for younger folks? Like,
Right.
What's your hope that they get from the film?
My hope, which is kind of manifest in this BlackStar Film Festival, is that we have intergenerational connections as filmmakers, cross and transracial connections as people of color making film and working in this medium, understanding technology and helping each other along as it morphs, as we can use it, how can you use it, you know this, I know that, what's motion graphics doing now, help me out, how can I get a distributor, oh yeah, your distributor went and saw my work. So there's this sharing that goes along. I think that we try to foreground it with the little bit of time we had to incorporate younger voices and commentary in the short doc that you'll see tonight in terms of what was the legacy for these folks. Some folks never had heard of the coffee house, but they knew some of the effects of, for instance, Essex Hemphill's work, Christopher Prince's music, and it showed up as, oh, you were a cohort of people. Wow, we didn't know that. Where's this place? And it still exists. It's now an apartment, nice apartment, in a very gentrified end of Washington, D.C., when before it was an alley. You had to think about it when you went down the alley, take your breath, and move on down to the door and knock on the door and get into a safe space. Because it was, H Street was, it was a zone, it was a crack zone, and that alley was particularly infamous.
Yeah.
So yes, we wanted to be sure that the voices of younger folks and their effects on the work or the legacy of it, or the fact that, in fact, the coffee house is part of a larger legacy of the Harlem Renaissance. This is how the Renaissance took shape. The Harlem Renaissance began in Washington, D.C. Lots of the folks who were the leaders of the Harlem Renaissance were cutting their teeth artistically in Washington. We're writers there. We're going to, Georgia Douglas Johnson's salon at 15th and S Street Northwest. And then they all went up to New York around the same time, and then you had this Renaissance. We see ourselves in that same motion. At least we didn't see it then because we were too busy working and figuring it out and learning from each other. That was the other thing, was the cross-pollination that I got from dancers and music and they got from film. And it was an incredible incubator for us in terms of political presence, artistically, and how one moves forward as a person of color, as a black woman, as a black man at that time, under that kind of political pressure hanging over us at that time, and still be visible, push forward the visibility, push forward the worlds that were not being explored, the stories that were not being told.
Yeah.
So that's the shape of things.
Yeah. And when is this film screening again?
8 p.m.
8 p.m. today.
Today at the Suzanne Roberts Theater. We hope you all will come. We're part of the showcase called Portraiture. We're in great company.
Yeah.
Incredible films in this one, as is the one I just had to leave.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of that, but you're worth it.
Thank you. My last question is, what are you working on next?
We're working on lots of money right now.
Ashe.
We have a project that we're putting out to the heavens about another significant and younger generation artist, choreographer, and we hope that it will have a larger venue this time, right off the bat, because the producers of it would be a large venue.
That's beautiful. We look forward to that.
Thank you, Maori.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you so much for this. Blessings.
Thank you.